Estamos de volta com mais um programa da UDC de internacionalização, recebendo os principais nomes, principais referências, professores do mundo inteiro. E hoje, de maneira muito especial, nós estamos recebendo a jornalista Meg Murphy. Ela é nada mais, nada menos de que uma das vencedoras do prêmio Pulitzer em 2003. Então, uma grande referência do jornalismo no mundo. E passou pelos principais jornais também do mundo. E é com muita honra, com muita satisfação que nós a recebemos aqui no programa.
Thank you.
Então, antes de mais nada, eu queria ouvir um pouquinho dessa sua experiência. Prêmio Pulitzer, 2003. Como foi chegar até esse prêmio que é cobiçado no mundo inteiro?
Well, the path to the Pulitzer Prize, that's a great question. It involved a lot of hard work and finding mentors that really mattered to me and following a dream. So I started studying English literature in Toronto as a student, and I found my way to the student newspapers and realized that journalists were the type of people that I wanted to be around because they ask difficult questions, they are not pretentious, and they really care about bringing information to the public. So I started pursuing that passion, and it led to writing for daily newspapers, and then eventually the Pulitzer, which was as surprising to me as to anyone else.
Antes da gente falar sobre a história que levou à premiação, eu queria saber da senhora quando que surgiu o interesse pelo jornalismo. Em que momento houve esse interesse, quero ser jornalista?
I realized I wanted to become a journalist as a college student, and it was because I was out in the community and witnessing political activism and cared about that and realized how important it was to have it covered accurately. So I decided that in order to make that happen, I would start writing the stories myself. And when I did that, because I was at a university, I could immediately see the difference it made because it created more people involved in the same movement. So being a university student and doing journalism was a terrific combination because it made me feel I had found a voice, and it made me feel powerful and the community feel powerful because we all sort of rose together.
Que tipo de comportamento a senhora, enquanto estudante, enquanto aluna, tinha na faculdade e que hoje a senhora se dá conta que isso foi fundamental para atingir o seu sucesso?
I became incredibly passionate about writing. I joked when I was speaking to students here a few nights ago that I even slept at the student newspaper. I developed a whole network of mentors and friends that inspired me. And I fell in love with what I was doing, and I worked on it 7 days a week. And that sounds extreme, but it was also incredibly fun.
A senhora acredita que o aluno participar dos laboratórios e inclusive dormir nos laboratórios é importante?
I do. I mean, obviously they don't have to sleep in the studios, but I feel like university is the right time to become consumed by a vocation and fall in love with it and throw everything into it. You have the energy and you have the foundation and the people around you who can help you succeed. So I feel that absolutely, it's very important to find something you love and then pursue it with a great deal of passion and perseverance. And university is the time for that.
Eu gostaria que a senhora comentasse como a senhora chegou então à história que levou ao prêmio Pulitzer, onde envolve alguns elementos importantes e que a senhora mesmo comentou na sua palestra. Como é que a senhora chegou e identificou que aquela história era a história que poderia realmente ser premiada?
Great question. First of all, we had no idea that this story would win the Pulitzer. I mentioned a different story that I did a few years later that I chose to write because it was a feature story and I knew that it had the elements of a Pulitzer Prize. But what was interesting about the Pulitzer that I was part of, I was a lead writer on the team that won, was that we were just trying our best to tell the story of a community with the most care and sensitivity and detail that we possibly could. And then it won a Pulitzer. And we were extremely surprised because it was a small newspaper. But it just reflected actually the teamwork. It was incredibly important, the teamwork, and our connection to the community. We reflected the reality of that community, and that's what won it. But breaking news is so different than other categories in that it is kind of, you don't necessarily enter the breaking news story knowing that it'll win the Pulitzer, but it was a nice reflection of the hard work we were doing. I would like to add, though, that I had mentioned the other night, too, it was somewhat strategic on my part in the sense that I joined a small newspaper. I went to the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and I wanted to stay in New York City or a big city, but we were told we should go to small newspapers and pay our dues and work hard. And the small newspaper that I chose had actually won a Pulitzer many years previous. So I tried to get in a small newspaper that I knew had the potential to win. And I knew I would be surrounded by young people, I was in my 20s, we're all in our 20s, that would be ambitious and want to work hard. So, can I add one more thing? One other thing is just, I think it's incredibly important who you surround yourself with at this age. It's extremely important that you surround yourself with people who are equally ambitious and are going to challenge you.
Eu queria saber da senhora que elementos são esses importantes para chegar a esse prêmio? Uma boa história, o que se considera uma boa história a ser contada?
Well, I can speak to, there are many different categories for winning a Pulitzer in journalism, and there's investigative, and there's breaking news, and there's feature writing and public service. I'll speak to the feature writing because if you're seeking a story, that's one of the ones you can actively look for. For feature writing, I would say finding a story that no one else can tell with the same level of detail and intimacy as you is important, as well as finding a story that resonates with the community, the readership at large, because it addresses something that matters to everyone on a deep level. A feature story is like a magazine-length story. Like it's a narrative. Well, it's not always narrative. A feature story is it's not necessarily breaking news. It's a longer piece. Like magazines, those are all feature stories. I feel I will add one other thing that might be more succinct, which is that any story that would win a Pulitzer has to, in some ways, change the reader. It has to be powerful enough that a reader will walk away from it feeling that they have been in some way changed by having read it.
Qual é o limite de uma boa história contada dentro da sociedade, da comunidade, que emocione, mas que não seja sensacionalista?
I think it's about depth. There are many stories, including the story that won the Pulitzer, which was a story about 7 boys who went out on a river on an icy night, and it wasn't night actually. So it was a story of 7 boys who went out on the river during a late afternoon, and 4 of them drowned and 3 survived, and they tried to save each other by linking arms, and we told the story of what happened that day and then how it affected the community. That could be sensationalist. Many, many stories could be sensationalist, and the difference is whether, if they're reported with a kind of depth and sensitivity and nuance that gets at larger truths, is what makes it not sensationalist.
Parte das suas histórias, pelo menos na sua palestra, trouxe a criança. Essa é realmente uma característica sua, de contar histórias que tenha a criança envolvida de alguma forma?
Well, it's interesting. The story, the breaking news story that I wrote with the team in my 20s, that was happening, and we went to cover it, and then we just did our best possible journalism covering it. The other story I spoke about that was nominated for a Pulitzer in the writing category was something I chose in my 30s. And I chose that in part because I had myself been so changed by writing the earlier story. And there were parts of that story that I felt we didn't have time to tell because it was breaking news. And I wanted to capture, I guess what is my passion there is to capture the love within a family. And so this other story, I was able to spend a year with a family and capture kind of when people go through tragedy, there's such stories of resilience and courage there and love. And I think it's really important to write those stories.
Essas duas, ou uma dessas duas histórias, são as histórias mais emocionantes que a senhora já escreveu?
They were definitely high on the list of stories I've written that were emotional, particularly because with the first story, I did spend a year with the families of the children who survived, reporting on them. And with the second story, it was a story about a little girl who had a rare form of brain cancer, and she died during the course of the time I was with the family. And that was incredibly difficult as a reporter to be that close to a family going through what they were, because it's an incredible honor to be invited in to witness that. And it's a challenge to play a role where you are a compassionate witness, but you don't become overly involved. I think for all journalists, that's a real balancing act.
Ter sentimento, mas ao mesmo tempo não se envolver demais a ponto de prejudicar a redação da matéria escrita.
Yes, yes. I think this is a great question, and it comes down to our role as journalists. You have to remember it's not about you, and you're playing a role and you're providing a service. That's very important. When a family invites you in, or anyone you're interviewing, they are trusting you to represent what it is that their reality at the time, and they need you to stay separate. It's what makes them feel safe. And so I think just by holding them in mind, it helps the reporter step back and play a professional role with empathy, but without making it about the reporter's feelings. And I would add for student journalists that it gets easier because what happens is that you see that when you write something, and if you can bring some beauty to the storytelling, it can be very healing in some ways for the family or for your sources. And when you see that you can take something and transform it in a way that gives it a bigger life, it helps. It helps.
Eu queria que a senhora citasse alguns fatores importantes, como, por exemplo, persistência e humildade são fatores fundamentais para conquistar o sucesso?
Yes, I would say definitely. Persistence is key. It's 99% of it is persistence, I believe. I think it's very important to be humble, not just as a way of being in the world, but as a journalist, because it's a relationship business, and people respond to how they feel in your presence. and they're not going to share their stories with someone who intimidates them or makes it about them. So yeah, I think that both of those characteristics are very important.
Que dicas, mensagem a senhora deixa para os alunos de jornalismo aqui da UDC, que presenciaram e que prestigiaram a sua palestra, para que também tenham essa ambição de buscar boas histórias e, como consequência, um prêmio?
Well, I would say I was very, very impressed with the students that I met the other night. That room was just filled with energy and amazing questions. And I would suggest that they keep, first of all, read a lot and find journalists that inspire you and read their writing and reach out to them. Like, I invited people to reach out to me after the lecture, and I hope they do. So make sure you do that because you need to be inspired. But in terms of developing your craft, lean on your professors so that you keep learning, and then figure out what it is, the kinds of stories that you care about, because if you can find those stories, then you'll be motivated to tell them well and perfect your craft.
Agora quero saber se a senhora já foi conhecer as Cataratas do Iguaçu. O que a senhora achou? What do you think about Iguaçu Falls?
I love Iguaçu Falls. Yes, I think that the city is so vibrant. I love that there are 3 countries that all come together in one place here, and there's such diversity. There are so many wonderful stories to be told, and it just feels like young and alive and vibrant.
A senhora sentiu muita energia lá nas Cataratas?
Yes, a lot of energy. Yeah, great things, yes.
Então é com essa energia que nós gostaríamos de agradecer a sua presença aqui no programa, aqui em Foz do Iguaçu, na UDC, e que a senhora venha muitas vezes ainda aqui para contar um pouquinho mais das suas histórias.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Eu que agradeço mais uma vez. E o nosso programa vai finalizando com essa referência no jornalismo mundial, a jornalista Meg Murphy, vencedora do prêmio Pulitzer em 2003. Nós voltamos no próximo programa, com certeza, com uma nova referência. Até lá!